The Trump administration has said it is eliminating more than 90% of the foreign aid contracts of the U.S. Agency for International Development and $60 billion in overall foreign aid. When you look at where the money has been going and how it's been spent, well, I think you know why they're cutting it. Here with more is Texas Congressman Brandon Gill. He serves on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, the House Budget Committee, and the Judiciary Committee. He represents the 26th Congressional District of Texas. Congressman Gill, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Tony, thanks for having me.
All right, so you really dug into this yesterday at the committee hearing. You know, there's all the left's all worked up about the president cutting DOGE, coming in and looking at this wasteful and ineffective spending. This has been an ideological slush fund for the left, has it not?
Well, that's exactly what it is. You know, for decades, the United States Congress has funded areas of the administrative state that have had little to no accountability for what they're doing with the money we've been giving them. And what we found out from the past month of DOGE and the executive and the investigations that we've been launching in the subcommittee of DOGE in Congress is that so much of this money is funding left-wing pet projects in other parts of the globe. And in particular, it's become a form of cultural imperialism. It is going to more traditional cultures than the United States and funding left-wing projects like transgender surgeries in Guatemala or DEI projects in Eastern Europe or all kinds of other ideologically based programs all over the globe. And that's what we're trying to stop. And that's what our investigation earlier this week was about.
Tyler O'Neill with the Daily Signal in testimony this week on the Hill about USAID spending pointed to where money was going to organizations like George Soros. It was almost like USAID and federal funds were used as a donor match program. So the leftists could double their impact by teaming up with the U.S. government aided by U.S. tax dollars.
And that's exactly right. And you ask yourself, how has the left been so effective at pushing ideologies that are so contrary to common sense? Men should be in women's sports, or men can get pregnant. No normal person believes this, but the reason they've had so much power is because their whole institutional movement is subsidized by taxpayers. We see that both abroad and in the United States. We spend over $500 million every single year funding NPR and PBS, organizations that routinely attack Republicans and conservatives and Christians and run cover for Democrats. We've been funding a vast and convoluted network of NGOs that push left-wing ideological causes. You know, that is what has been driving the leftist movement in the United States for a very long time. And those are the people, as you've noticed, who have been screaming the loudest as we've been exposing this waste and abuse. And those are the people who have no business getting a single dollar from taxpayers.
Now, the history of USAID goes back to the 1960s as kind of being the humanitarian outreach arm of the United States government to facilitate our foreign policy objectives and priorities. Clearly, as even you laid out yesterday and earlier this week in the committee on how this money is being spent. I mean, we have condoms being spent to the Taliban, as you pointed out, promoting LGBTQ pretty much around the globe. But in the midst of this, there are some good programs that are going to poor countries, helping with health-related issues, and it is building goodwill. Now, I think we spent way too much, but there are some, as I mentioned, there are some legitimate programs. Where will they find a home in this administration?
Well, many of these programs that are legitimate, to your point, are going to be housed within the State Department so that they can continue doing legitimate work that they've been doing. You know, the purpose of foreign aid should be to advance America's interests abroad. To your point, we have a long history of being generous to other nations, but it should all be done in the context of America's interests, our cultural interests, our political interests, not as a way of imperializing traditional cultures with secular left-wing values. And that's the kind of perversion of this program that we're trying to stop. this is what America First means. It means advancing America's interests abroad, and promoting transgenderism in Latin America certainly doesn't do that. That doesn't buy us any goodwill on the world stage. It alienates the United States. And I believe that the American people are tired of seeing their tax dollars actively working against their interests, against America's interests, and promoting values that they find repugnant and are antithetical to their moral convictions and their faith. And that's what we're trying to root out here. But to your point, there are legitimate foreign aid programs that are going to continue. And the president's been very clear that that is not what DOGE is stopping. DOGE is not cutting off life-saving aid, food assistance, for instance, in deeply poverty-stricken nations where there is a life or death situation. What we're stopping is waste, fraud, and abuse. And in these programs, that is very widespread.
Yeah, no more transgender operas. I mean, in my time at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and meeting with leaders in foreign countries, one of the complaints they had with the policies being pushed from our State Department that were, as you pointed out, not just contrary to American values, but you have countries on the African continent very religious in their orientation, and this stuff was offensive to them. But there was a bigger plan here. It was to push it through the State Department onto these other countries, back through the United Nations to try to influence even our own policy. So it's way past time to address this, and it sounds as if it's going to be rooted out. It's not going to go forward.
Well, that's right. I mean, think of the fiscal situation our country is in right now. We're $37 trillion in debt. We're running $2 trillion annual deficits. Our country is bankrupt right now. And in an environment like this, we should not be subsidizing political opposition in the United States, whether that is at home or abroad. You know, I am sick and tired of my tax dollars, and I know my constituents in Texas 26 agree with me on this. I am tired of my tax dollars funding programs that I find repulsive. We are broke, and we've got to get back to fiscal sanity. This is a part of that.
It absolutely is. When we're having to dig deep just to get a dozen eggs, we don't want our tax dollars being wasted. In fact, we want our tax dollars cut, and I know that's one of the major projects of the Republicans now is to make sure our taxes don't go up. Congressman Gill, we have 2 minutes left. This is actually your first time on the program, I believe, since you've been elected to Congress. I'd like to ask our new members, so people get to know a little bit more about them, what motivated you to run for Congress?
Well, you know, I've been involved in politics for quite a while now, and I never expected myself to jump into the political fray in this respect. But when the opportunity opened up and our former congressman announced he was retiring, I knew it was time to make sure that we had good, solid, conservative representation in Congress. I think that there is a silent majority that is not so silent anymore, who has been begging for Washington to listen to them, to stand up for conservatism, to stand up for their Christian principles in Washington. And they're begging for it, and that's what I hope to do here in D.C. And a big part of that is defunding some of these agencies. Of course, it's fighting back and trying to defund Planned Parenthood. It's pushing for pro-life policies that our country needs desperately. And it's fighting to bring our country back to its Christian roots. So those are my goals here in Washington. We've got a long ways to go. Luckily, we have a president in the White House who is much more amenable to our worldview and actually supports the American people. So my biggest goal here is to provide legislative support for him. But we've got a lot more work to do here.
A lot of work to be done, but a lot of hope that it'll get done. A lot of opportunity ahead of us. Congressman Gill, again, thanks for joining us, and look forward to having you on again real soon.
Tony, thanks for having me.